And then after that, I will pass the mic on to Rob, who will introduce our guest teacher today, Scott. And I'm very excited about hearing the Dharma today. And what a treat that we get to have this time, this space, and these teachings that has been passed down to us for over 2,600 years. And part of Pacific Northwest Meditation's vision is to bring together the Dharma from many diverse voices, many different lineages that all come together to practice meditation and cultivating this path of peace, compassion, and wisdom. And here at Pacific Northwest Meditation, we strive to cultivate a sense of belonging for new and experienced practitioners from the widest possible range of backgrounds, ages, races, ethnicities, cultures, sexual orientations, gender identities, socioeconomic classes, religions, political views, disabilities, neurodiversities, and beyond. And we are based on the unceded lands of the indigenous people, including the Confederate tribes of the Grand Ronde, Siletz, and many more, based in Portland, Oregon. And we aspire to be a contribution to our community and create a space of belonging and support for all folks and underrepresented communities. And we strive to cultivate a beginner's mind to build a sustainable community that practices deep listening, openness, speaking honestly, and acting with ethical intention. We strive to offer diverse Buddhist teachings and activities following a gift economy model. We serve and support the transformation of all sentient beings. So, with that, I'm going to pass the mic on to Rob, who's in the room here. And please, Rob, if you would do us the honor.
Good evening. I am Rob, and I just wanted to introduce Scott. I have I spend time with Scott in a small group. We have an online group that we meet, and I just wanted to acknowledge you, Scott, and I really appreciate your coming to guest teach with us. Scott has been a monastic for about 10 years in Tibetan Buddhism, and I'm just happy to welcome him. I don't want to take any more precious time, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Scott.
Mm.
Great. Thanks, Rob, and thanks for the invitation. Um, let's see. Just to say something briefly, I'm not a monastic anymore, as probably you can see from the hair and the colors of the clothes. I was a Buddhist monastic for 9 years, and from 2008 to 2017. And now I have a small daughter, and I happily practice in the householder tradition of Himalayan Buddhism. So I like, for me, we could talk about that if you want at some point. Seen both sides of it, and they both are amazing. We have a chance as both sort of non-monastic practitioners to awaken, and we have a chance as monastic practitioners, and they both, as many of you know, have served each other traditionally. There's been reciprocity back and forth, but either way, that's another conversation. Just wanted to say that. And yeah, Rob, Rob, I don't know, you've probably been in my sangha for about a year or more, I think, and Rob always brings a lot of insight and not only valuable questions, but a lot of heart. So when he invited me here, I thought, great. I'm sure Rob is a part of something that's also very heartful. So I didn't hesitate. I believe I have taught at the center before, but when it existed in a different incarnation, I came in person in 2000 and I don't know, well, I think I might have been a monk. Yeah, I might have been a monk. Maybe like 2015 or 14. I don't remember. I don't know if anybody was around in that incarnation of the center.
Oh yeah, we are a breakaway from PMC and yes, uh-huh. So
Got it.
yeah, a number of us did come from that center and it went through a transformation and just like all things, right? Conflict leads to transformation. And yeah, there's a question I received a question in the chat. Scott, where are you located currently?
I'm from the States, but I'm from San Francisco Bay Area, but I live in Mexico. So my wife and daughter, we live. My wife and daughter are from Colombia. I mean, my daughter is born in Colombia, so we live between Mexico and Colombia right now in Mexico.
Oh, fantastic. That's
Yeah,
so wonderful that this technology makes it possible for us to be able to connect with you. So we're so happy that you're here. Yes.
thanks so much.
And
Yeah,
you
awesome.
studied with the Dalai Lama, right? I just wanted to ask one more question just to kind of build up,
Yeah.
why is it that, I'm so excited about hearing you talk today. It's because that, you were trained under the Dalai Lama. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Not quite trained. I mean, I started my path in the Dharma and Buddhism in around the year 2000 when I was 20, 21. And I was mostly connected with a teacher named Lama Zopa Rinpoche. They actually have a center in Portland. It's Matripa is connected. That was actually the international hub of his organization for a long time. He just recently passed away. And then yeah, and just like many thousands of people, I sort of attended teachings with His Holiness 14th Dalai Lama in various places, San Jose, California, and various whenever he would travel to the States, which he used to do before. And now he's his age sort of prohibits a lot of travel. But what happened? Yeah, so I took ordination under him. So I took novice ordination in India in 2008, and yeah, I mean it's with hundreds of other people, as you can imagine. He's a pretty major figure. So he did to provide it to the Tibetan and Himalayan communities ordination every year, usually one time a year, and then various foreign Buddhists who had done some vetting, to see if they were kind of okay to be ordained. Um, we were also allowed to join in that ceremony, but it was a small amount of us, maybe 25 versus hundreds of Tibetans and Himalayan practitioners, among some, Koreans, Japanese, etc., all over Asia. So yeah, so I didn't really train under him, but I was ordained as a
Oh,
monk. Yeah.
wow. That is still so wonderful. How precious. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's quite fortunate, and as Rob said, I was a monk for 9 years, and I spent a lot of that time in combination of solitary retreat, mostly in California and Colorado, and then I would travel to India, Nepal to study, as well as study in the States as well, because probably most of we're really fortunate. We just living in I don't live in the US now, but when we live in the US, a lot of these great masters and all the Buddhist traditions come. So we have a chance to meet them, which I would just say more and more I realize not only how fortunate that is, but actually we need to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
It's really, really important, no matter what lineage you're in, right?
Mm.
They all come from different lineages. And so, I very much view as a sort of you said, attempting to be a Buddhist practitioner, I very much view these traditions as in the process of migration, right? So, if we look at the history of Buddhism, it's migrated to different countries, different cultures, but that usually took time. That wasn't like, oh, here it is now. That usually took hundreds of years, at least in the case of Tibet, if not, China, Japan,
Mm.
Vietnam, et cetera. I don't know the histories there, but I'm sure it took time. So yeah, we're in the process of that. So I really am a staunch kind of believer in that we need to sort of how do you say it in a healthy way connect to these great masters in the form that they're
Mm.
teaching it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned some things in the beginning around sort of inclusivity and all these things, and I'm a big fan of what I call non-colonized Dharma, and I'm happy to talk about this more. It was not a topic of tonight,
Ooh,
but
yeah,
it's a
forget it.
what this means is sort of, you know, doing our part to meet the Dharma where it is, where it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't fit or it doesn't feel good, or we don't connect to it. Um, Asking questions, staying open instead of changing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, naturally things change, right? I mean, you can see just any Buddhist country you go to, it's like the cup of how the Dharma gets transmitted. If you compare like India to Japan as one example, it's so unique, it's so different. But it took time to make sure that cup was actually able to hold the Dharma, right, and pass it on from person to person, generation to
Mm-hmm.
generation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're still in that process. And so what I mean by non-colonized is we don't try to interpret it through a Western lens. We try to see it as best as possible
Mm-hmm.
through the lens of these cultures, which is I would say it's not completely possible, meaning it's not 100%,
Yeah.
because if we're coming from somewhere else, not assuming some of us here are maybe are coming from someone else, but the point is, I'm born in California, so of course I'm going to see things from a different perspective. I'm going to see with my own eyes and sort of glasses, and I think it's actually important to note that, and then attempt to understand and integrate, right? So I'm a big fan of that, and so a lot of my work, I don't know what Rob would, most of the time I'm just mouthing off about the Dharma, and being a very poor parrot, like the bird, a parrot of my teachers, uh, but I view my role more as like less a Dharma teacher, more as a translator, not in the sense of Tibetan to English, but in a sense of like culture to culture, right? And so I'm still in that process, but I think that's important too. There's translation that needs to happen and cultural bridges because there's so much misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm.
When we just the more and more I study the Dharma, the more and more I realize we just have a really different perspective in the US, let alone other Western countries. It's just
Mm-hmm.
vastly different. And of course, we are also influencing other countries. So
Mm-hmm.
that's also nuanced. Anyways,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't plan to go into this, but I just wanted to
Mm-hmm.
start with that because you asked me about my background. So
Yeah,
yeah.
thank you for sharing that. And please, I will turn off my mic. So, the floor is all yours. That was just a
Oh,
little
it's all,
warm up to get you going.
yeah.
Your fire's lit, so this is good.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, no, because for me, it's also really important. It seems like we're a small group here
Mhm.
tonight too. It's important. This is actually whatever we're going to discuss in the Dharma is actually applicable to you. So the more we can chat and discuss together is better because it gets, it helps me to know you and how this can sort of be applicable, right? Um, with that said, maybe I'll introduce the topic a little bit, and then we can do a little bit of practice and then just again on that theme, that thread I just spoke, open it up a little bit and just sort of flow since it's kind of, when it's more than I don't know, Rob, how many people are in the room with you. It doesn't look like that many, but when it's more than 50 people I might have to structure it a little bit more strictly, but since it's quite small we can be fluid, if that sounds good to you all. Yeah.
Yeah, we're a small group right now. We're just recovering from a pretty big winter storm, so it's
Mm,
pretty quiet right now. So there's two of us in the room, and then we have our Zoom friends.
cool. Cool. Yeah, and I always appreciate if people can turn on their cameras. If you can't, I understand. Sometimes I get screen fatigue and don't want to look at a screen either. But it's just nice for the community vibe. At any point, you can turn your camera on. So, so yeah, Rob was kind of just pitching some things, and you know, we ended up landing. I don't remember, Rob. Maybe there's some background here. We ended up landing on this topic of compassion and resilience, right? Um, this is Obviously there's so much to say about compassion in Buddhist practice. I actually, the first thing I will say is I think it actually is quite misunderstood. And so maybe we can kind of open up some, I'll open up some ideas and then we can dialogue, like I said, eventually about what that might mean. Um, Kind of with my sort of rant about colonialism. um, how do you say this? Buddhism isn't a singular thing either, right? I think a lot of you know this already. I sometimes use the term Buddhisms, right? Because religion is a Western idea. It's not an Eastern idea, right? At least in the time of the Buddha in India, religion I don't think was thought of in the same way as like sort of it's organized in Western thought into secular and religious. We don't really have that difference traditionally. Like I don't know Tibetans. Tibetans, of course, now they think that way because they're influenced by the West. But my Tibetan teachers don't think that way. It's not like secular and religious. So that's a whole thing to sort of discuss as well. Um, Sorry, what was my point there? Oh, the Buddhisms. That, even the word Buddhism is a colonial word. It sort of is it has to do with how when India was colonized, how, again, I don't think sometimes people they don't mean to do bad. It's just they don't know how to understand it. And so they have to put it into some sort of format they understand. So the British at the time were like, how do we call these people? Oh, well, they're close to the Indus River, so they're Hindus. Let's just call them Hindus because they do all this kind of weird ritual stuff that we don't understand, but it seems to kind of be similar. So let's call them Hindus. But that didn't exist in India. There wasn't Hindus. There was just different groups of practitioners of different forms of higher powers and different rituals and things. And it's the same for Buddhism. Buddhism was just one of those. Even today, when you travel to India, and hopefully some of you have been, uh, you know, most Indians don't have a problem. Like the Buddha for them is just another one of their saints, kind of. Like it's just like, and so they don't necessarily think of him as separate from Shiva or other kinds of manifestations of whatever they think of as the divine. So, anyways, I'm just saying all this because even the word compassion, I'm going to express a little bit more of a perspective coming from Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism, which is mostly what I practice, and more in the Himalayan traditions. And then also in Himalayan Buddhism, something important to note that I think is useful because I think a lot of you practice in sounds like Theravada and some other traditions as well, from what I was just overhearing. Himalayan Buddhism is a three yana system, and yana is the Sanskrit word for vehicle, like that which gets us from one place to another, a path. You could say path as well. And so three yanas includes what we call Shravakyana, which is the teachings that lead to solitary to arhatship, basically, right? That would be what's called the Shravakyana. And then we have the Mahayana or the greater vehicle. And that doesn't mean better than, it has another implication, right? Though in the history of Buddhism in India, there is some chauvinism between these schools that did exist. And then you have Vajrayana or the indestructible vehicle. And in Himalayan Buddhism, we practice a synthesis of all three of these. So compassion even takes on a different meaning in each of these. And that's just within Himalayan Buddhism, let alone Theravada Buddhism or anything else, right? Um, so this three yana system is not I want to say this too, because especially when there's practitioners from other traditions of Buddhism, um, it is not a judgment or an organization of other people's Buddhisms. It's an organization of the Buddhism that ended up in the Himalayas. More or less, there's two periods of transfer in the 8th century. Mostly the Vajrayana traditions came in through great Indian saints like Padmasambhava, Vimalamitra, these kinds of also Shantarakshita was a monastic who brought the Sutrayana tradition, and it was established in Tibet then. And then there was a resurgence in the 11th century. So you have these periods of Dharma not only entering the country but actually being translated. And Tibetan itself is a very interesting language. Sorry, I wasn't intending to go into this at all. So Trina, yeah. Trina inspired me. I don't know how. So I'm just gonna, sorry, Trina, I'm gonna blame you, but it wasn't even what I was thinking. But it seems like you guys are pretty into the Dharma, so I think we can go into
Yeah,
some
this
kind of
is
more
yeah, this is really great, Scott. I love that you're giving us a background because for yes, for most of us, we don't have our one toe dipped in other in Tibetan. So it's very really great to be able to hear this. I see some thumbs up like from Margaret. Yeah. And so
cool.
continue. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Just sort of some context, more or less, to get us steps for compassion. Um, so, so the Tibetan language itself is derived from Sanskrit, and the Tibetan language was created for Dharma, which is pretty trippy when you think about that. Like what spoken and written languages were created specifically for Dharma. Sanskrit, you could say, is a dharmic language as well, right? So anyways, that's just some background. So there's these periods of mass translation, language, all these things happening, and then over time, based on this sort of corpus of different transmissions, teachings, translations of sutras, etc., that were gathered in Tibet, mostly into what they call the Kangyur and the Tengyur, which are the one is a whole collection of all the sutras of the Buddha that was translated into Tibetan, and the other is commentaries by great Indian masters, and some Tibetan and some Chinese actually too. So, anyways, so this is to say, this three yana kind of system grew over the years, and it's a way for Himalayan Buddhists to categorize, study, contemplate, and ultimately meditate and realize the Dharma, right? So I just want to kind of give that background. So as I said, compassion is you know, I think all of us probably could attest to this. Compassion itself is not complicated. It's not easy. I consider compassion to be, I'm going to say this, but I'll talk about it more later. I consider it to be slightly painful rather than loving kindness, which is a little different, right? But either way, it has a different way we work with it, even through the three yanas in Himalayan Buddhism, right? Mostly, as I said, I'm going to focus on sort of the Mahayana approach. So, with that background, a little bit of my take on this, right? Again, happy to share some things if they're useful. Is the more and more I practice the Dharma myself, really, I see compassion as the main window for most of us into the truth of the Dharma. And the reason I say that is because for me, the Four Noble Truths, which we would put in the Shravakyana teachings in Tibetan Buddhism, um, they kind of, though you can interpret them from each yana, the Four Noble Truths is something I don't know how to say it. For me, and of course I advocate for other Buddhist practitioners, no matter how high of a teaching we go to, meaning if we go to like some special Vajrayana empowerment with His Holiness such and such or whatever, we have to be able to reference that back into the Four Noble Truths. So I'm always coming back to the Four Noble Truths. And, especially in the last 4 to 5 years, I work a lot just with the First Noble Truth. And to me, the First Noble Truth is a teaching on compassion, right? Like just full out. I know there's so many ways to talk about the First Noble Truth, but it is, I think the Buddha was so skillful because, um, you know, in my experience, in my Dharma practice as well, if I'm not relating with the dissatisfaction, stress, pain, suffering, all the levels, confusion, all the levels of dukkha that's arising, if I'm not connected to that and my heart isn't able to open, there's no wisdom, you know? And often there's no juice in my practice, right? There's no flavor, there's no substance. It becomes kind of intellectual. So this forms my first statement I wanted to talk about tonight, which is it's not a fact. It's a question. It's a prompt for all of you, right? Which is that compassion can form the basis of life. It can form the basis for how we live, how we interact with ourselves, like our own dukkha or our own thoughts, emotions, etc., our bodies, as well as others, right? And we usually I'll define compassion here, one definition of it, which I think is important, because it distinguishes it sometimes from where I see, how do you say it? We all know compassion is in pity, so we distinguish it from that. But it's not quite loving kindness, but it involves love. So usually in the order of the what we call the four boundless states, that's how I'm going to kind of introduce it. We order it second, right? So you have boundless loving kindness or boundless love, that's first. Boundless compassion, that comes next. Boundless joy, and then boundless equanimity, right? And some of you probably have heard these in the form of the Brahma Viharas, which are very similar, but way the practice functions is a little bit different between the lineages, but they're very similar. So boundless compassion comes second, and so I think there's something to say about loving kindness here, which is, if we haven't trained in loving kindness to some degree, if we don't center that, compassion can be really difficult, right? So I think, I don't think everything's linear, but I do think there's a reason the teachings set things up like this. And in the Himalayan Buddhist traditions, just a side note, when we actually practice the four boundless states, when we meditate on them, we actually put equanimity first. So we don't use it as the result. So in the Brahma Viharas, equanimity is usually the result. In the boundless states, equanimity is sort of the basis for then developing loving kindness and compassion. My friend Sharon, I'm not trying to name drop here, but just we've talked about this. Sharon Salzberg, probably who knows, very well known meditation teacher, mostly trained in Burmese traditions and Theravada, but she does have Tibetan teachers too. We were talking about some kind of because we were talking about how equanimity fits into the Brahmaviharas and the boundless states, and she had some interesting things to say about it, in the sense of I don't know how to say it, like this kind of, sometimes equanimity can be the result, and sometimes it's sort of pervasive as one is practicing loving kindness and compassion. And I thought that was interesting. She didn't see it as a separate thing. It was sort of part of the training of loving kindness from her Theravada background. So, anyways, I don't know because I don't practice it that way, but I just wanted to share that. I thought it was quite beautiful. Um, so the definition in the boundless states of compassion, which I find pretty, how do you say it? The words are pretty poor to the experience, but nonetheless, we're talking here, so I'll use words. The definition we usually say is the aspiration or the wish for ourselves and others to be free from suffering and its causes, right? And so there's this energy, there's this sense, there's we use aspiration as a tool a lot in traditional Himalayan Buddhism. So there's a wish, there's an aspiration for ourself and others to be free, not only from suffering, like the actual experience of it, but its causes, which is interesting, right? Because when we add that in, to me, that takes on a deeper meaning, which we can get into later. So compassion as the basis for life was kind of my premise of this talk. And again, just giving some different doorways for us. One doorway being the Four Noble Truths, right? Being a doorway where we're I don't know how you all think of the First Noble Truth. I think of it as I like the translation. This may come from a Theravada teacher on just no, like Know, no dukkha. That was my favorite way to think of the First Noble Truth. No dukkha. And I don't think of it as a demand or like a order. I think of it as like a compassionate question. And this is something that um, this is how I work with the Dharma these days. I try to find questions within the teachings and not necessarily facts. Though at the same time, I might take on a temporary fact as a way to work with a teaching, right? Because as you know, a lot of the Dharma is talking about extremely hidden phenomena. Just in that first teaching on no dukkha, dukkha doesn't just refer to like our difficult emotions, our physical pain. It refers to much deeper forms of confusion and stress. Usually we refer to these in the Himalayan traditions as the three types of dukkha. I like this formatting. The dukkha of dukkha. Actually, this is across lineages. The dukkha of dukkha, the dukkha of change, and all pervasive dukkha. So that all pervasive dukkha, most of us can't even we can't perceive that. It's just too subtle. Even the dukkha of change is pretty tough. Because the dukkha of change applies to our pleasure. So automatically it's like sort of the bubble starts to get popped when we're contemplating that second type of dukkha, and contemplating meaning trying to see it. Is that true? Is that true in my life? Right? And so bringing the First Noble Truth in and interpreting it through the lens of compassion, this wish to be for ourselves and others to be free from suffering and its causes, or dukkha and its causes, we could just say that. Um, you know, to me, if that's not pervading our practice, all of this stuff can really turn into just more ego stagnation, more ways to control, fix. And Rob knows me. I can kind of be a big loudmouth sometimes and a little too direct. And, so I don't mean to be confrontational by saying this, but, when we really dig into the Buddhist teachings, we can see actually um, things are not completely fixable through the relative. Things are not, we can't remedy life completely through what we call relative truth, right? We can shift it around. We can make it better. We can help others to experience less suffering, but can we end suffering through that? That's the question. And my experience of studying the Dharma and practicing it as the Buddha was saying, no, we have to look at something else. We have to eventually look at our underlying nature. How is that? How are we relating to this, our sense of self, our sense of duality? And these usually go into the teachings on anatta, right? And shunyata, or emptiness. And really, the first noble truth, in my view, and these teachings on compassion, they sort of center us in a very wholesome relationship with life to be able to eventually connect with that non-dual wisdom, whether we do it through the teachings on emptiness or the teaching on not self and anatta. And of course, anicca, like impermanence, right? We'll get into that a little bit later. So, I don't know about you, but when I'm not approaching an experience here, I mean, one of my experience, I mean, yes, I think it is valuable, and definitely in the Mahayana traditions, at some point we kind of do our compassionate work more in relation to others. But I want to kind of again throw out something a little bit maybe controversial. I'm not sure, maybe it's not at all. Depends on the person. Can we actually assume somebody else's uncomfort, stress, dissatisfaction, suffering, etc.? I mean, other than them telling us that, but it's coming through our eyes, it's coming through our experience, it's coming through our lens, right? I mean, so this is kind of something we need to establish as a Buddhist practitioner. That's really important. There's actually no perceptions happening outside of our mind and body. Of course, we can infer things that are happening around us and in others. We can, accept someone's speech, right? Like, if someone says, "I'm in pain," we can accept they're in pain and try to help them, right? But really, what I'm getting at here is when we're using compassion in the Buddhist path to meet life, there needs to be this recognition that um, suffering is not fixable through kind of the normal way we fix things, right? It's not endable that way. It's endable in another way. The third noble truth points to something a little bit different. And at the same time, everything is happening through our own perception. So when we're talking about suffering, we're actually talking about our own suffering all the time. This is my point here. Not to say there's not real suffering happening outside of us. It's not an argument here, right? Of course, we can infer that, right? But all we can really deal with at the end of the day is our own experience of pain, pleasure, etc., right? And what this means is not a coldness where we reject others. I actually see it 100% different than that. What it means is a deep dive into our own relationship with life, our relationship with our human body, mind, emotions, etc. And that's where the awakening takes place that does eventually benefit others. So we have this term in Mahayana Buddhism called bodhicitta, um, which is a very rich term. It's not an easy thing to pare down into like a simple explanation because it means a lot of things. It's actually the whole path. But it's a type of altruism that a practitioner generates that their own awakening, their own liberation is connected to the awakening of others, right? And it's connected because when we awaken, we become, they say, like not only a guide to others, but we just become an awake being that is no longer proliferating suffering in ourselves, in the world, and this is a big deal, right? And so I think again, you can push back on me if you want in the Q&A. Yeah, I see your hand, Margaret. I'll get just one second. You can push back on me if you want, because but I just want to say that there's this, I think, really interesting perspective here, which is I think which is at odds sometimes with how we think compassion functions, which is to sort of fix something on the outer level, but actually our own experience of it is our own. Not to say we can't influence others and should, right? Like so maybe a quick caveat here because I know this can get misinterpreted. This kind of discussion I'm opening up. We need to help others. We need to help reduce other sufferings. Full stop. There's no argument. There's no argument about that. That we should use some of our time to do that. But if we really probe into the first noble truth and then the second noble truth, right, the actual causes of dukkha, right? We just say karma and afflictive emotions in the Himalayan traditions. Um, if we really probe into that, we will see the only way out is through. And at that point, we become awake and we serve others in that awakening. And actually, when we become awake, others actually become awake. That's a little bit of a tricky issue. But nonetheless, we can, again, I'm sort of seeding things that I know you're gonna be like, what does that mean? And we could talk about it later. Margaret, yeah, if you want to jump in, if you had something quickly.
Well, first of all, I want to say your knowledge and your sharing of your knowledge is a real gift to me, and I think to everyone else. I mean, it's beautiful to listen to you speak. But in my training, I've come to well, I don't know if it's an understanding, but at least it's been made reference to that the untrained mind is always in a state of imbalance and I guess you could say suffering. And it's not until I guess I see I come from a Theravada background, and so I want to say that it's not until you enter the stream that you really recognize what suffering is. Uh, let's see, I was taking some notes that I wanted to share. Um, eh, I feel as though there have been glimmers of understanding of uh, how of suffering when I've had um, this overwhelming feeling of how labor intensive maintaining this body is, you know, and it wasn't from the intellect. It was like, oh my, wow, there's just a lot that comes with this, you know, and from the time we enter and take our first breath, um, and leave our poor mother's body. To my 71 years old, that is almost overwhelming at times, but it's within the sort of the petri dish of my experience, you know what I mean? So that it's not, I don't feel exhausted by it, but boy, I really feel it and understand it, you know. Um, but I could say a lot more. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think I mean, the two things you shared, among the first, I think that's shared generally across the lineages, meaning, we can contemplate dukkha, we can meditate on its nature, like I said, usually in the Himalayan tradition. Well, we also meditate on the six realms, but
Mhm.
I didn't want to bring that in tonight. But we also, these three types of dukkha.
Mhm.
Um, we contemplate them, and then we try to directly see them in Vipassana meditation, right? And
Mhm.
I think that's similar
Yes.
to other lineages. And then, as you said, the deepening. What's so beautiful, I think, with the practice of Dharma, when we're actually, he said, in order to see the Dharma, we need to practice, because I just see it as layers. There's
Mhm.
layers of
Mhm.
insight and confusion we need to shed. Sorry, there's confusion we need to shed and layers of insight we need to see, both conceptually and non-conceptually.
Mhm.
And you're correct. I think it is much more down the road for someone that they fully see the
Mhm.
nature of dukkha. But
Mhm.
we can have insight into it, especially through, we're going to do a little bit of a somatic vipassana practice in a few minutes,
Mhm.
connected to compassion practice.
Mhm.
That is one of my main practices of compassion. But yes, so yeah, I'll just share that, and then as far as the second thing, yeah, I mean, this leads to kind of my main point. You front ran me, but it's okay. I'm okay. I don't need the credit. You could take the credit, especially because you have more years on this earth than me, and therefore, I'm just getting in the age where I'm like, oh, that didn't hurt before, and is that just a temporary pain, or now am I in a body like that? I'm just getting to that place in my life. So I got a lot to learn. But yeah, what you were referring to, I usually think of as these doorways to compassion for us,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And the suffering of aging and sickness and death,
Mhm.
right? That is one of our major doorways for
Mhm.
seeing dukkha.
Mhm. May I just
And
add something?
sure,
Uh,
yeah, yeah,
I'd just like to add that today I was practicing with the group, and I realized that you know, ignorance still happens pretty frequently in my mind. I'm thinking, how we tend to forget that we're asked to go against the flow,
yeah,
and and um, and that's a gift in itself. It's because it helps me to realize how, with the frequency with which I'm deluded, or and so I don't know. I love being around monastics and listening. So, anyways, thank you for letting me share that.
yeah. No, well, beautiful shares, and I think, yeah, what you just said is, I mean, it's really useful to our conversation, and I think powerful as well, because even Buddhist compassion is asking us to go against the flow,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And I think, again, these are my own experiences of it, so I don't want to say it's the way, but mostly what I call my definition of compassion now, like a less intellectual definition, is allowing the heart to break open without breaking down. That's how I
Mhm.
define it for
Mhm.
myself. It's
Mhm.
usually a broken heart,
Mhm. Mhm.
and we all know what that feels like. But I think it's quite challenging, also for me in my ignorance, to actually allow that to wake us up,
Yeah.
right? And because it does go against the stream, because usually the stream is, how do I preserve my identity of self and its pleasure right now?
Right.
How do I preserve that? How do I make it better? How do I
Mhm.
avoid suffering at all
Mhm.
costs? Right.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
now we're getting into like the main, center of this. And the
Right.
Dharma is, as you said, to go against the stream of that, because that actually is the root cause of dukkha.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So I think this is where, I'm glad you brought it up, because it can center mostly how I wanted to present compassion and resilience tonight, which is, how do we develop this compassion? And I guess it's a trust. It's I mean, there's a path to it. It's gradual, and there's kind of a conviction in the Buddha's teachings that we are not just trying to be comfortable all the time. So
Mhm.
in my experience, compassion practice is uncomfortable, but
Mhm.
but it wakes you up, and
Mhm.
that brings a different kind of joy,
Mhm.
different kind of way it sustains us.
I hate to say
Um,
it, but it's not about us.
well, no, it's
You
definitely
know,
not about us.
it's
Yeah.
it's fascinating when I remind myself of that. That doesn't mean that I should suffer too. It just means that the self can get in the way, certainly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And so, in both ways, I mean, it can prevent us from actually feeling our own pain and sort of using every mechanism to distance ourselves from it and deny it.
Mhm.
We'll talk about that in a second through the practice we're going to do. And then it can also disguise itself as being a good doer. And this is a
Mhm.
little bit more of a thing,
Mhm.
scary to talk about. But
Mhm.
I think you all are pretty mature, it sounds like. And I think we have a challenge, right? Because there's a lot of aggression. One Buddhist teacher I really respect, he defined the United States by, he loved the United States. This specific teacher spent most of his life in Canada and the US, but he defined the things that needed to be remedied or the sickness of the US, even though there's good things. He defined it in three ways: um, uh, hyper materialism, speed, and aggression. So materialism, speed, and aggression. And so I think in, because now we're going to weave in resilience at some point, in our wish for a kinder, calmer, more peaceful world, sometimes we center the ego's version of goodness, and that's a stepping stone. I think I realized I have to be kind of more open to this. Kindness is a stepping stone. Being a kind person, a gentle person. We all know that from the sutras of the Buddha. They advocate that. There's sutras that just talk about how to behave, basically, for both monastics and householder practitioners. And a lot of that has to do around how our kindness and our I don't know, it's not just calm, it's sort of like composure is the word I'm looking for. It's our composure, how that affects the others in the world. I'll give you one example that really hit me since I've been living in Mexico for, yeah, almost 4 years, like on and off. Um, Mexican culture is extremely polite in the majority of the country. I live here, and that used to frustrate. I'm kind of like a very direct person, and so someone would be very polite, but I would knew they didn't like me, like behind the scenes. And it used to frustrate me because I would think, why can't this person? I don't care if they want to, just be direct, don't be fake. Like I thought it was fake. And then I realized after living here for some years, this is a very powerful thing, whether it's fake or not. It's actually very useful because it's a kindness where it keeps, the energy and keeps people not in stress mode all the time, right? Because there's buenas tardes, buenas noches, buenos dias. Like that's how you greet people. And it's normal. Everyone greets everyone like that. And so I realized these how do you say it? Even though they could be limiting when it comes to liberation and awakening, because they're still, based around a self and identity ego structure, they're useful as a stepping stone. And so kindness is really important. And as I'm saying, compassion isn't always kind from a Buddhist perspective. And this is the tricky thing. We can get into that a little bit later. So what I thought now is let's practice. I was going to do some practice just to start, but I like to kind of contextualize this first so we're all on the same page. Otherwise, maybe the practice can go in the wrong direction. Again, I don't want to assume maybe some of you are newer to meditation. If you just need a little bit of calm and like you meditate, you like Buddhism because it makes you less stressed, great. Compassion will make you more stressed, right? But for a good reason. So compassion practice assumes we've already done the work to establish a calm nervous system and like a grounded presence, right? Some ability to sustain our seat. So I just want to say that so some of you are like, again, you want to do the meditation and feel calm. Just note that, that's where you're at and that's what you might need. But the practice we're going to do actually is to be with things that might not be calm, mostly in our feeling world. So this particular practice comes from one of my main teachers, Sonny Rinpoche, who is a wonderful Tibetan Lama because he really understands both the West and East, and he understands how to teach people in different ways. And he just noticed for a long time that those of us who grow up in let's just I don't even want to say West East, it's really just modern education, no matter where it is, right? We can seem much more intelligent than we actually are, meaning we can be very good with words and understanding, and we can get things quickly, but our emotional bodies may still need some maturing. So what he found is like he was really surprised when he first started teaching in the States. He's born in the border of Tibet and Nepal. He thought, wow, these people are so smart. I can go directly to like the most, advanced teachings. But he realized people weren't actually transforming. They weren't getting the experience. And so over the years, he's kind of developed some ways to help us to cut through some of those obstacles. And this practice called handshaking, I'm going to share with you, is one of those practices. It's more or less a somatic. He doesn't call it a Vipassana practice, but I do. A somatic Vipassana practice with compassion being the base. So go ahead and find a seat for practice. We'll practice for probably a good 20 minutes. We're going till 6:30 your time, right? Okay. So we still got an hour. But yeah, go ahead and gather yourself for practice. The main thing is just to allow the body to be upright, but you want to be relaxed, obviously. Just go ahead and start to connect with yourself, whatever that means, whether that means the breath, whether that means the presence and feeling of the seat or floor below you. For me, I'm often connecting with just the feeling of my feet touching the ground, or if I'm sitting cross-legged, just all the parts of my body that are connected to my seat, floor, the earth below me. And if you're mostly used to a breath-based practice, connect the breath there. Just allow the breath to meet the body in its location and connection to the earth, meaning even if you're sitting in a chair, that's the closest you can get to the earth right now. We simply just allow ourselves to be, allow ourselves to feel. Again, I don't want to assume, you know, most of you have been practicing for a while. Maybe there's some people newer to meditation here. So I'll just say it. The point of meditation is not to get rid of thoughts. So if thoughts come, just allow them to come, allow them to leave. One of my favorite examples of this is from the great Zen master Suzuki Roshi, who said, when you meditate, leave all of your windows and doors open. Let let anything come in, thoughts, emotions, etc., can come in and out. Just don't serve them tea. That's an excellent example of how to meditate. So don't feed the thoughts, but we don't reject them either. Within this presence of breath and body, go a little bit deeper. Just set the mind, set the awareness to bear witness to feeling world. This includes any emotions, sensations, energetic movement, whether it's uncomfortable, comfortable, or neutral. Doesn't matter. We don't have to label it those. Just really everything's allowed. And first, there's an approach of kindness, bringing in a sense of, or a wish, an aspiration to be kind to our emotions, whether they feel comfortable or not. like I said, the stepping stone is usually kindness, it's love. And on top of that motivation of love towards your emotions, now the compassionate attitude, the willingness to be with things that are painful. So I'm not assuming or saying you will feel something painful or uncomfortable now. You might not, but we're primed to be there for that. We're primed to meet that without rejecting it, without getting hooked and becoming it, because there's awareness, there's mindfulness, without running away, and without trying to fix or change it. So maybe this is again a controversial statement. It leads back to what I was going to say. I don't think we can fix the world, but we can serve it. So in this sense, the world is our healing world right now. That's what we're going to work with. So the question is it useful? Is it compassionate to fix my feeling world? Or is it compassionate to simply be there for it? Serve it. Serve it here just means be with it. So goes into this fourth category. We recognize when we're trying to control, manipulate, change, over intellectualize, analyze our emotions. Instead, we just feel and let be with them as best we can. So compassion here is the practice of being with. In this case, just being with emotions, energies, sensations, however they arise. As I've been advocating for, we want to develop compassion. That needs to first be applied to our own dukkha. And dukkha is not something to be conquered, it's something to be known. In fact, that phrase no dukkha, K-N-O-W, no, that can mean know it, just what it is, its varieties, its subtleties, but really it means know its nature. We can only do that by essentially looking at it, being with it, with a compassionate heart. Just like we practice impermanence through looking at the aggregates, here we can practice emptiness and compassion in unity through just being with experience, not poking it, not prodding it, not trying to change it. Ideally, right? We're going to notice when we're rejecting it, suppressing, becoming, trying to control. I notice that all day long. And we drop into the body, release again, release the control. Notice the control, release it. Just a couple of tips here, caveats, as not only do a majority of us suffer from sort of this kind of somatic emotional intelligence, in my experience, myself included. I've had to work with this a lot. Some of us, or many of us, have active trauma. So when this practice, or if this practice hits something, a wound too deep, we do not need to persevere in that. We can simply just move our awareness to a part of the body that is more neutral, that's not as activated. For instance, the fingers, the toes, maybe the weight of the body in the seat. Just find somewhere in your body that's more neutral. And if you just need to completely come out of the practice, I recommend opening your eyes and looking around. That can be an excellent way to just center yourself and not re-trigger. something that really doesn't need to be re-triggered. It's not about re-triggering something, it's about learning a new way to be with our wounds, to be with our dukkha. Sometimes we need to be able to do this in a light way. We're not trying to solve anything. I find coming between more neutral parts of the body, more activated ones, just in small doses, you kind of dip into the more activated ones, let go, approach with kindness, and then come back to the neutral space, or just take a break from the practice for a little bit, come back. This isn't a concentration practice, so we're not like sustaining mindfulness. We're simply just being with, and we're actually training in compassionate presence. So I'll just leave some silence and you can experiment with this for a little bit. Let go of the need to know with a thinking mind, be with the feeling. Let's just allow experience to take place, whether it's calm or not, whether it feels peaceful or not. We're just simply developing compassion in one of its most profound forms, which is non-conceptually. How we relate to our feeling world is how we eventually end up relating to others, how we relate to the problems we perceive around us. We relate with space and allowing, or do we try to control, fix, pretend it's all good? It's not. Do we approach pain with aggression? Do we approach it by becoming a victim? These are all things we can start to understand. We don't have to use the thinking mind. We just simply drop into the feeling world, be aware, and feel the feeling with compassion. Compassion is being with it. That is the compassion. But we're not becoming it. It's one of the things, or we're practicing that. We're practicing not becoming. Easier said than done. And the keys are really feeling the feeling, allowing, dropping judgment. dropping the attitude that something actually needs to even change necessarily. Let it be what it is, but be with it. The awareness is our gift to ourselves, where we don't have to become it, because awareness simply hosts something. Compassion is not suppressing, not trying to control or fix. So practice helps us to facilitate what I would call the root of resilience, compassion, which is facilitating the heart breaking open, but not breaking down. First, heart can break open and not down towards our own life. Of course, our heart breaks all the time for others. We deepen our relationship, how we can work with that, how we can work with the world around us through the world in us. They're not mutually exclusive, they happen at the same time. So if we aren't able to offer compassion towards our own emotion, we sort of try to control, fix it, push it away, reject it, distract ourselves. It's a little bit of a joke to want to offer compassion to others. It's just it won't be that developed. It won't be that profound. The depth happens inside of us, and it eventually pours out to a much more effective compassion for others, for the world around us. And we don't need to wait until we've perfected it internally. We might be waiting a while. So we do both at the same time. We try our best with our friends, family, community, sanghas, people we work with, work for. But we never allow someone to break us down or something to break us down. This is the enemy of compassion. So this takes work. In my experience, this is not something that comes quickly. It's a lifetime of deepening. When you're ready, we can just simply start to look around the room, do something that feels good as a bridge between the formal practice and informal practice. Informal just being our gathering here, or hopefully we're still bringing mindfulness. So if you had your eyes closed, you can maybe just start to, just center yourself in space, looking around the room. If you're working with something quite challenging, making sure you feel safe in the room is important. Hey, so thanks so much, everyone, for trying that with me. Quite a, how to say it, this practice is very easy to underestimate, and it's hard to do it justice in a single guided meditation. Thing that I've found often takes, if you really want to know about it, you can go find teachings from my teacher, Soner Rinpoche. It's wonderful how he talks about this. So yeah, maybe what I thought we'd open it up a little bit. Just anything you want to, anything's welcome. Questions, shares, and or things from the practice, and then yeah, we'll see how much is kind of on your minds, and we can go from there. Sure, go for it, Margaret.
Yeah, the two things just keep coming up for me is skillful means through the heart. That's what it keeps coming up for me. Like you say, it's not an easy thing. And I think another part of this is the willingness to just accept that it's not an easy thing and it's okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And I feel as though I had the honor of uh, being the child of a woman who was an immigrant and a poorly educated but a bright person, and she brought a lot of heart into into my life, and I'm deeply grateful for that, and I feel as though I learned a lot from that. So yeah,
awesome.
yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Yeah, and I love that you brought up this is a process, and I
Mhm.
think for me, I'm much more of a process oriented practitioner rather than a result goal driven
Mhm.
practitioner these days, and I feel that that helps us to keep the compassion moist throughout our practice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
Hmm.
Also, questions are welcome about the practice. If it was sort of like foreign to you, or you want to know more about it, I'm happy to share more.
Thank you, Scott. I'm
That's a quick
Allison.
question.
Oh,
Yeah,
did I interrupt?
you're good. Yeah,
Okay, okay.
yeah.
Um, something I really love the part about, I wrote this down about, allowing the heart to break open without being broken and
Breaking down. Yeah, yeah,
without breaking down. Yeah.
yeah.
And what was happening to me is a realization just probably 5 minutes into our meditation. I have this condition called restless leg syndrome, and I take medication for it, usually about this time. It's a preventative, and I do it every day, or else I can't sleep even. And I forgot. So that I wasn't very compassionate right away to myself. I
For
was
forgetting.
I was mean to myself, you idiot. Why didn't you do this? You knew that this. So I went and got my pill and I took my pill, and of course it takes time to kick in. Meanwhile, my one leg is just going crazy with restlessness, and I can't control it. So, um, that was kind of a infirmity in a way that I was going back to compassion. This is what happens. This is what's happening right now. And it's okay. And it's not going to last forever. But right now, I'm just going to know that it's there and do my best to, you know, really actually go into that instead of be mad and say, close the door on it. So that was a really pertinent practice for me tonight, just to kind of try that compassion with it instead of the anger.
Wonderful. Yeah,
Thank
beautiful. Yeah, you're welcome. And thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think it's there's so many things, these kinds, it's just one version of practice. I personally make this my one of my main compassion practices for self, at least, because it's not conceptual. We're not trying to figure out, you know, how to be compassionate. We're just being with exactly as it is, how it is now, as best we can. That's a process too. Um, and there's, you just reminded me of something that this really helps me with, which is, my aggressive perfectionism. Not saying that's what you were experiencing, but the sense of needing to get it right or perfect or all of that. And you're correct. I think it's beautiful when we recognize it's okay. Like, I can make mistakes. Yes, they have consequences, but I can make mistakes. Yeah, so wonderful. I'm really to me, that is a result of compassion. It's sort of like, it's kind of related, Allison, but I'll just share it, because I think for me to really embody compassion, I've noticed I have to get out of the mentality of whether I'm a good person or not. And it's kind of like another layer of what I wanted to talk about tonight, but I'll just share it now. And if it's interesting to you all, I could say more, because I think this is kind of like another, and again, here we're just talking about a good person. What you brought up for me, Allison, is like being a good person to ourselves. And what does it even mean to be a good person, right? In Buddhism, actually, especially in the what we call the Buddha nature teachings that the Buddha gave in certain sutras, it pretty much says we are beyond good and bad already, and we just simply need to discover that through the path. And that's the premise. So there's not even the idea of original sin necessarily in Buddhism, especially Mahayana Buddhism. So or these sutras. And so to me, that's like a very wild thing, because it's sort of like, again, when we're centering compassion, we're decentering that ego-based way of living that gets very stuck in good and bad, right and wrong, perfect, not perfect. And I think the more complicated question is like, what do we do in our actions in the world? Like, that's where it becomes more complicated. And obviously we have a lot of the Dharma focuses on that, because we do get so confused with that. So, one we have the five precepts, right, as householders. We have in sometimes in the Himalayan Buddhist traditions, they talk about avoiding the 10 non-virtues. Things like this are sort of baseline things, but they don't define whether one is good or bad. They define whether one is disciplined and kind and compassionate, really, right? So I know it's a little bit different than what you're saying, Allison, but you triggered that for me. So yeah. Yeah, kind of while we're waiting for others to, if you want to share or ask something. I had this thought, which I'm not sure if I like it or not, but as I was sort of gathering, as I was reflecting on sort of where our Dharma talk has gone so far, I was thinking on like the possibility that loving kindness practice, its purpose is to actually help us to become a good person, like a beneficial person in the world, a kind person. And compassion practice is to help us to go beyond being a good or bad person. This was like a thought I had, because for me, sometimes this idea of my attachment to what it means to be good sometimes blocks what's actually going to be beneficial, right? So again, I want to be careful with that, because that can get misinterpreted. But as I'm sharing, that's on the basis of already having developed a lot of love and kindness, right? So that's like a given. One already is stewed in that. And then compassion requires something deeper, because I'll give you an example we use just to sort of back up my point. Um, I'm guessing some of you are mothers here. I haven't had the chance to be a mother, obviously, in this life, but a father, yes. And um, there's one example used a lot in traditional teachings of sort of the wrath of the mother when the child is in danger, right? So for instance, if a child is gonna, is running towards a cliff, is it useful to be goopy and kind of like, oh, hey, can you like not do that? No, you're gonna like yell, and why? Because of the mother's compassion, so the child doesn't get hurt or die, right? But sometimes compassion looks like that, but we need to be really sure that's where it's coming from, right? When that happens, most of the time, compassion looks kind, but sometimes it does require this. That's what I was saying. This kind of theory I have that it requires us to go beyond the identity of good or bad, according to someone else. I mean, we know where we are, but someone else might not like us. Candle, yes, go for it.
Hi, Scott. Thanks so much for
Hey,
being here.
thank you.
You referenced to search some of your teachers, but I think you mentioned Sogni Rinpoche. Did you mean Sogni or Lama Zopa?
Oh, Sony Rinpoche. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mentioned both of them, but when it comes to the practice I just shared, that was something he developed.
Yeah.
And his book, Why We Meditate, you can find more in that. It's a wonderful book. Also, there's kind of Daniel Goleman writes this kind of like more of the psychological science side, and Sonia Rinpoche presents the Dharma side.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. He also has a really wonderful course that I work for. I work for his course platform called Fully Being. You can also check that out. It's
Hey, Scott.
suspiciously silent tonight. Oh, I knew it. You were coming. I was like, Rob is a little. I heard from Rob. Is he still here?
Yeah, sometimes I have to resist the urge to ask a question right away.
Yeah, I figured you did a good job.
Well, this is just a wonderful reminder of how refreshing this particular practice is. And, um, I appreciate the kind of the touch point of non-dualism of being and experiencing. And it's almost like it's like when you jump into a lake or a body of water, you're just immersed, and it is it's a feeling experience. Um, but I think especially when it's cold water, then the mind is just not really at all active. But I'm probably saying too much at this point, but I really I love the simplicity of um, experiencing in the feeling world and getting away from the thinking. Um, I probably spent too much time in my life thinking, and partly because maybe that's some of the work that I did as well. But it's so refreshing and alive to be not analyzing things. Um, so thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thanks for sharing. And I think, I think it brings up also some ways we can kind of deepen a perspective to this practice, because yeah, I mean, I don't think it's only you. I mean, the modern education system basically centers the critical thinking mind and trains it deliberately, because that's how things develop. The material world develops better based on that. And so it's not a bad thing. It's just that that can become imbalanced. And so, I didn't even realize I had that imbalance until I met Sonny Rinpoche, and then he taught this practice, and I realized, oh, I thought I knew how to feel my feelings, but this is a whole another level of what that means. And so we just don't know until we know. And so thought is essentially not the problem. The problem is, in my view, is the analytical mind that shoot, which is actually, when you think of an analysis or thinking, although it can be useful and do a lot of good things, including in Dharma, it's really fake, meaning like it's literally just totally immaterial images and symbols that we're building in the mind. And those can take shape into a building or a course or, you know, conversation you're going to have with someone, obviously. So it could be useful. But if our whole worldview is based on that, we're missing out on a whole worldview that happens in the body, that happens in the feeling world. And there's a whole intelligence that's there as well. And then, of course, when it comes to compassion practice, um, as we can see, like intellectual compassion is kind of useless because it doesn't necessarily affect our behavior. It doesn't necessarily affect how we treat our emotions or treat others. Already the Buddha Dharma, especially the Mahayana canon, it assumes we have natural compassion. And I think we can all acknowledge that. Most human beings, when there's need, when they see, overt suffering happening, they run in that burning building. Most people will do that. I do believe that. Um, but even though there's that natural compassion, it doesn't mean we're that's available to us in all facets of life. So in Buddhism, we train it, right? And we train it in specifically boundless compassion, which you were alluding to, Rob, which is kind of this compassion that has no reference point, and therefore it actually becomes liberative, right, for the practitioner, and then of course for how we conduct ourselves. But either way, yeah, I found this totally. I mean, this practice has changed my life. I've been doing it since like 2010. By that point, I was already 3 years into being a monk, 10 years into very serious Dharma study, but really had like a maybe had, I don't know, like a 13-year-old version of emotional intelligence, and I was 30. And again, I mentor people on a regular basis, one-to-one and in groups, and this isn't to point out anything or judge anyone, but I work with people of all ages, and this is like an epidemic in my view, just a lack of emotional intelligence. But intelligence here is somatic intelligence, not, oh, I know what this emotion is and I label it and blah blah blah. And that's all, that's useful, but it's not what I'm talking about here. So yeah, I find it's just really needed in the modern world. All cultures, anyone who's been modern educated with modern education, we need this kind of education too.
Could I follow up with a little question?
Sure, yeah. Or Trina was about to jump.
Oh,
Trina, you wanna?
okay. All right. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's pretty clear that we can delude ourselves in our thinking all the time. I'll just speak for myself. Um, but can you speak to the simplicity or the clarity of the feeling world and how perhaps thinking about it is what trips us up rather than just feeling?
Yeah, yeah. I think I know what you mean by the question, but yeah, like the feeling word itself is also confused, right? So like that we have to be clear about that. It's not like the feeling world knows better, right? I mean, we've seen what's happened when leaders are like, I just went with my gut. We've seen the result of their gut, right? With that said, of course, like when we say gut, we mean intuition and all that, and that can have some intelligence and some deeper things. But if it's not trained, then of course it's not necessarily more intelligent. That's where I think we do need the thinking mind, right? Where it is really useful. But here what we're doing, so maybe this points more to what you're asking, Rob. I think here what we're doing is we are, the main host of this is awareness, right? Or mindfulness. And why I call this a Vipassana practice is because it's not Vipassana in the strict sense of like some method you're going to learn in a book. literally there can be thousands of different kinds of Vipassana practices. It doesn't have to be because it was taught authentically in a monastery or something. It just means, does it produce insight or not? And really, when we turn the awareness towards that, can really turn anything into a Vipassana practice, essentially, in my view. So the main key is there's awareness, and awareness is hosting. So we're knowing while simultaneously feeling with compassion. That's why this practice is like, on its deeper level, this is very powerful because it involves a lot of the path. It involves compassion as the motivation and intention and way of being, and then mindful awareness. So it does require quite a lot of mindfulness. That's kind of one of the obstacles I see for people in this practice, is they just don't have the mindfulness hasn't stabilized yet. So that, the distraction comes in too much. So it's difficult to layer into the feeling world, but that'll happen over time. But either way, it's that awareness which allows it to, you know, if we're working with a wound, for instance, in this practice, that wound, we want it just like a snake coiled around, a tree or a stick. We want that wound to be able to unravel itself. And that happens through the combination of awareness, where we're not becoming the wound, but we're feeling the wound through compassion. And then it can kind of unwind or unravel itself. And that would be maybe the intelligence part coming in, or the insight part that happens through Vipassana practice. Not insight into emptiness necessarily, but just it could be all kinds of insight. And that can unravel things. Um, anyways, am I speaking to your question, kind of, or something around it?
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, awareness is really important. Yeah, if we're just, there's plenty of people who just move through the world feeling everything, and their feelings are truth. No, our feelings are not truth. They're highly delusional the majority of the time. But if we don't relate to them with compassion and awareness, I mean, we're also stuck, right? So I think Trina had something though, because she hasn't said anything yet, and then Margaret. Yeah.
Oh, that's okay, Trina. You go ahead.
I'm reflecting, Scott, on this process of first developing ourselves in kindness and love. And when you were talking about that aspect where, we turn towards suffering, if there is no kindness that's there, we're not in touch with our goodness, right? Or the goodness that is also there. So, and as I was reflecting on how compassion feels like too, it doesn't feel good. It's not pleasant, you know? And there are moments where that tenderness or that raw feeling of suffering, whether it's within me or, when I see it within others, I think of it like, wow, if I didn't have kindness or love for myself or them as the basis, that is hard to be with because it feels, painful. You have to touch into that. And then as I was reflecting on this with the Brahma Viharas, and I think, oh, joy is that relief that I get where I'm like, okay, this is getting to be a lot. I feel real, the tenderness of this suffering is just so much. Let's, sprinkle in some joy, right? Or really feel the joy underneath it all. So I'm just sitting here reflecting on some of the things that you're saying and how, in my upbringing, my mom taught me the Brahma Viharas, and it always came from that place of, first being kind, or, just like you're practicing, you're faking it, and then all of a sudden, oh, it comes more natural. And then from there, when we are turning towards suffering, whether it's our own or others, it becomes easier because we have that ground of goodness there. Yeah, so I really appreciate hearing your lens of it. It's wonderful to be contemplating it further. Hmm.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you, and thanks for sharing. Yeah. 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 Because we didn't talk kind of resilience is weaved in here, right? I haven't mentioned it. I mentioned it directly a little bit, but I think resilience from a Buddhist perspective does come, uh, of course, ultimately it comes from a recognition of non-dual wisdom, but on the path, it does come a lot from the kindness we develop. and of course the compassion, we develop. To me, this I was thinking about resilience. There's some things I was going to say, but basically, the enemy of resilience is the more we reify and cling to our view of self and reality and other, like more or less ego clinging. We just call it that. That's the opposite of resilience. But kindness and compassion are really, they're not beyond ego necessarily initially on the path, but they kind of loosen it, so then it provides this resilience, this real strength. I don't know. Yeah, there's the people I know who really stay quite strong and resilient in life. Yeah, there's a lot of kindness. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
Even as you're, saying that ego has to give up being right. It has to give up something, right? For there to be that space for love, for, okay, I'm gonna give up, righteousness, or punishing them, that there's a me and then there's a they, them, right? The other. And so it has to give up all of that for compassion to arise. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Dharma, ultimately, actually, we come to find, and of course, this has to be experiential. It can start at the concept, but it needs to be experiential eventually, that we actually don't find enemies eventually. And this is somehow that's a controversial idea nowadays, but because I'm talking to a Buddhist group, I figure at least we can, you don't have to agree with that, but at least we can bring it up, that there may be a possibility that enemies are, mm, it's like a construct, basically. Yeah. I think there's still I wrote some articles on this. There's still the fact that laws exist and consequences exist. Because some people think when we talk about it that way, that's sort of just saying we become a doormat, let people do what they want. No, that's not what it's saying. No. Yeah, Margaret, I think you had something.
Well, it's pretty close to what Trina and you were just talking about. It seems to me like I'm most pleased in my heart when I think of an experience when both the heart and the availability of, my availability come up together, and that can be
Yeah,
very beautiful and incredible. And like you said, it's not always really passive. Uh, but I think, because it's so easy for us to get in our way, I don't have the time, or this is not safe, or, I mean, yeah, you do want to feel safe, but um, I don't know. It's, not to get too complicated with it, but I think you understand. Yeah.
yeah, I understand. No, and I think you're also pointing to something which this does become complicated for a lot of us, right?
Mhm.
Um, some things I have in my notes which I just didn't mention yet, because I think I can see you all have a pretty good understanding, and so we can just talk about ego clinging and sort of the opposite of not self as a way to describe what actually keeps us from opening to compassion and fuller love and wisdom, but and which would also be the opposite of resilience. But I had some things down here, just briefly, and then James, I'd love to hear from you. I'll just mention them because I was thinking sort of like what forms in the what I see again, like the US is very diverse. I'm just because I know you all live in the US, so I'm just speaking to that. It's very diverse. There's a lot of perspectives, but I do see like two things specifically becoming the opposite of resilience. And one is aggression, like when we use aggression as a tool to solve problems, that would be the opposite of developing resilience. And the other is a tricky one because there are genuine survivors, there are genuine, things around that. But when we feed an ego-based victim mentality, this will also subvert resilience. So it's sort of a tricky thing because it's sort of like, do people do harmful things? Yes. Should they be challenged on that? Yes. but what do we do about that? That's where I think that the approach here takes on more nuance. But go ahead, James. I just wanted to insert that. Yeah. I think you're muted, but oh, I think you're muted, James.
Oh,
Jane.
I'm sorry. Oh,
There you go. Yeah.
well, thank you for everything this evening. I really appreciate it. Um, Kind of what you touch on about like resilience. I know you talked earlier about views, and sometimes I don't understand the mechanism, but when I'm meditating or when I'm out, doing things, and I don't cling on when something comes up. I don't cling to it. I kind of just let it go.
Mhm.
Then I feel more compassionate and I feel more resilient. I was wondering if you could just comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is at the end of the day, it's really simple, you know? And so yeah, the same, if I can release wherever I'm, contracting, right? If I can release that, for sure, it's the same for me. Yeah, I mean, they really go hand in hand because compassion and wisdom, at least in the Buddhism I've been trained in, compassion and wisdom are two wings of the path that help us to sort of move towards awakening, but they're actually the same thing at the end of the day. It's just they're kind of separate until we realize that. But yeah, like what you just said is a good example of that for me. Totally. Yeah, beautiful.
And what you said about good or bad, I know like in the Thai forest tradition, especially, I think it's from the suttas. I kind of remember it, and maybe Bhikkhu Bodhi translate it that way, but it's wholesome and unwholesome, and then skillful and unskillful. So it's kind of the same thing like you were talking about.
Yeah, yeah, and again, it's just like we're using words to point to something that's quite tricky because like we all know there's things that perpetuate suffering and reduce it and eliminate it, right? And so what do we call those? The good and bad I usually refer to is simply like the sense of self being good or bad. But that's I think the distinction in Buddhism. I think I assume across the Buddhisms that there's no judgment of one as good or bad, and that is really different than our Western traditions. Not to say they're bad or worse. It's just we have to understand that a lot of us who grew up in the U.S. and or around a lot of Abrahamic tradition, whether we practiced it or not, it's sort of in our bones. This sense of original sin, and it's true. And it we see it nowadays where a lot of us suffer with low self-worth and things like that because we believe there's a self that can be worthy or not. But the truth is, if there's no self, there's no worth or not worth. There's just infinite space, right, for compassion. And it's a really different view, but it to me it feels truthful when I connect with that. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, James. Sorry to bring it. You said something beautiful and simple, and I sort of complicated it. So sorry to do that. Yeah. Ultimately, I always sprinkle in some of the wisdom teachings of Buddhism, the teachings on not self or emptiness, because to me, those are the most compassionate things that have been taught in this world. When we really understand what those teachings mean, they're the most compassionate thing the Buddha did. Like, so compassionate. But it's tricky because it takes some grappling with those concepts and meditating on it. Yeah. We made it. I didn't know if we'd make it to 2 hours, but we did it. I got 6 minutes, but
Well, can I just quickly say that, the Buddha wasn't going to hang around and teach,
yeah,
and until he was reminded of leading with the heart, like one of his disciples reminded him of. So I find that kind of interesting too.
yeah, yeah. You're also reminding me of like one of my favorite teachings. This is there's many interpretations of the Buddhist life and how things function, and ultimately I see them as a teaching. But
Mhm.
the one of my favorite ones is in the moments or weeks after he attained awakening under the Bodhi tree, and he, in the Mahayana canon, it's sort of the Brahma, and everyone came to him and had to request him to teach. And this is where we have this tradition of being requested to teach the Dharma, or it originally comes from. But to me, I view that as one of the Buddha's first teaching, because basically his teaching was, I forget I can look it up, but basically he said, um, the the mind is peaceful, transcendent, beyond concepts, etc. But nobody's gonna get that, so I'm just gonna stay
Right.
silent here,
Right.
basically, right?
Yeah.
So actually, like his that is actually one of the most powerful Dharma teachings, just that in itself, right?
Mm.
Because what he's saying, he's not saying I don't want to teach others. He's saying there's actually this is beyond words. There's
Yeah.
nothing to say. But
Yeah.
of course, they then prompted him and said, "Okay, now at least try."
Hmm.
That's what he
Hmm.
did, right?
You
Yeah,
must. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
That's those are some of my favorite teachings when the Buddha remains silent. There's
Hmm.
actually a bunch of sutras where his answer was to not say anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
Well, cool. Maybe we'll close here. Trina, what do you think?
This is a good place to end. Thank you very much, Scott, for taking the time to be here with our Sangha and to share the wonderful teaching. I don't know how everyone feels, but I feel this joy of having heard the Dharma through you. So thank you so much, and everyone shares also adds to that spiritual joy as well. And I put in the chat the Dana information for Scott if you'd like to make a donation and for us to continue this tradition of Dana, and also the donation information for Pacific Northwest Meditation, so that way we can continue to bring in guest teachers from all over and from all different traditions and lineages. And also, on this note, I'd like to share the next teacher we have coming. And next week is Nellie Coffer, who's returning for reflective meditation. She co-wrote a book about reflective meditation, and she will be with us. And every uh, second and fourth Tuesdays, we have the Neurosangha that meets. It's a peer-led meditation group for brains that work differently from what society expects. And then the Be Queer Now group that meets the second and fourth Sunday at 6:30 p.m. And all this information you can find in the newsletter, um, and some on the website. And if you're not already on the newsletter, please just go onto our website, PNW meditation.org, to sign up for our newsletter so you can know who's teaching in the weeks to come. And then Kendall has her Tuesday tea time every Tuesday at 3 p.m. online. If you'd like to maintain a daily practice, wake up together every morning with myself and a lot of friends who also come to this group, 6:30 a.m. And along the line that, gosh, this is so great, Scott, because what you did was you continue this thread of the Brahma Viharas. We had, I think, Kendall and Asher who spoke about equanimity, and then I spoke about loving kindness and joy. We've spoken about a couple times. So, compassion just kind of ties it all together. And speaking of that, next week, the 20th to 23rd, the Liberating the Heart retreat that I'll be teaching with the Brahma Viharas there will be also offered on Zoom. So if you'd like to join on Zoom, that's also possible. You can see that in the newsletter. And right now, you can also register. I'll put this in the chat, wakeuptogether.org/retreat. And we've made it a hybrid for those of you who cannot come in person to join on Zoom to practice, like what Scott was saying, we're cultivating these heart qualities that leads to deepening and insight and awakening. And also, I think Is there anything else? I think I covered the bases. Kendall, Rob, anything like to share? Okay, please, Rob.
Yeah. I just want to express a tender gratitude to you, Scott. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. It really means a lot, and I hope it was beneficial to everyone here. So thank you.
Yeah, thank
Thanks,
I
you.
Rob. Yeah.
and I too want to thank you so much, Scott, for coming. It really meant a lot to me. And that I wanted to ask you where in Mexico you live.
We live in a place called Valle de Bravo, which is it's about 3 hours outside of Mexico City in the
Okay.
mountains outside. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's a little known place, but there's some foreigners here, but yeah, less than Mexico City.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And, just to mention too, if you all want to connect more with some of my freely offered material, you can go to my website, maybe put it in the chat, just my name, scotttusa.com. And then I have some free guided meditations. You can join my newsletter and blog. There's a lot of blogs, and I got a YouTube channel and stuff. So there's always lots of stuff I put out there.
And
Yeah.
it's a .com?
My name, scotttusa.com.
Okay,
Exactly.
great. Thank you.
Oh, with 3 T's, because there's 2 T's in Scott and
Mhm.
then one in Tusa T-U-S-A.
Tusa.
Yeah,
Thank
sorry, that's usually missed. Very
you.
common.
Oh, and send that.
Yeah. I look forward to seeing you all again.
Yeah,
And
thank you
Rob,
so
thanks.
much. Thank you so much.
Whatever. Yeah, it's my pleasure. As soon as Rob asked, I was just like, I love Rob. We see each other pretty much every week, and I just said yes because I knew it would be a good time. And any chance to connect on the Dharma, I'm happy. Yeah.
Everybody take care.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Yeah.
Sadhu,
Thank
sadhu,
you.
sadhu, yes.
Thank you.
Take care,
Okay.
everyone. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Trina.
You're very welcome. Bye bye, everyone. Have a wonderful.
Bye.
Bye bye.